We will get started with a Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Mr. Dahman, are there any corrections or additions to the agenda?
There are no changes to the agenda.
Okay. With that, I will entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
I'll move to approve the agenda as presented. I'll second.
There's a motion on the floor made by Jen, seconded by Leslie to approve the agenda as presented. Any discussion? All in favor, respond with aye.
Aye.
And opposed, nay. Motion carries. Moving on to the minutes from last meeting.
I would move to approve the minutes of the regular meeting held on July 12, 2021 as presented.
Second.
There is a motion on the floor made by Dave, seconded by Shelley to approve the minutes for the regular meeting held on July 12th, 2021 as presented. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor respond with aye. Aye. And opposed, nay. Motion carries. Action on vouchers.
Mr. President, I will move to approve general checking account vouchers totaling $1,049,841.29 and the building fund 49 vouchers totaling $4,038,530.92 as included in board docs.
I'll second.
There's a motion on the floor made by Joe, seconded by Leslie to approve general checking account vouchers totaling $1,049,841.29 and building fund 49 vouchers totaling $4,038,530.92 as presented. Any discussion? All in favor, respond with aye. Aye. And opposed, nay. Motion carries. Thank you. Moving on to public comment. We do have a few people signed up. We'll start with Amy Holden.
Is that on? Okay. Hi, I'm Amy Holden, and I live in the Milton School District. At the last board meeting, the SEL curriculum was discussed. During that discussion, a statement was made that the district's goal is for all students and families to feel included and be accepted in our community. I support this goal, and the board should make policy that supports it as well. However, I think the board needs to reflect on the statement and look more closely at the quarantine protocol that was voted on. Any policy that separates and divides students and staff by medical status goes against the SEL curriculum you say you are teaching our children. Different quarantine rules for individuals based on their medical status violates the district's own policy on equal treatment and discrimination. You want to teach kids to make others in our community feel included and accepted, and yet you are making policy that goes against that very goal. This does not show we are leading by example. Being divided, labeled, and discriminated against based on vaccination status does not make people feel included or accepted, and also takes away educational opportunities for those that have to quarantine 7 to 10 days without teacher instruction. This is a long time for a child to not be in the classroom, and what does it do for the working families that are trying to get back to work after the year they've just had? It is time for families to take it upon themselves to stay home if they are sick, not for the district to send kids home when they are not. It is time for the medical freedom to be honored in our district. If, as a community, we want there to be inclusion and acceptance among individuals, we must treat each other as such. Thank you.
Thank you. Next on the list is Mike Varan.
All right, is this thing on here? All right, so we found out last week that the PCR tests are being, with the emergency use authorization is being withdrawn. And for the majority of what the strategic plan, or the Milton Forward Plan, is based off of these tests. And so what I'm just wondering is, what is the plan going to be now that it is known that these tests are not accurate? They can't differentiate between the influenza and COVID, so everything was COVID. And what we've done is had an entire year of you guys going off of these statistics and telling us what to do. And what's going to turn out is that this is the largest propaganda event in modern history, and you guys are all part of it. You're patting yourself on the back for saying that you're keeping us safe, but what you're doing is making life harder for families based off of false positives and going off of rates. And what I'm saying is I see it, and more people are starting to see it. I was on the Rock County Health Department's Facebook page today, and I got banned for talking about this. And what I'm saying is, parents are going to start waking up to this, and this isn't going well. And what I would like to say is, for those that are just going along with towing the company line, this is people's livelihoods that you're just doing a yay vote for. And earlier on in June, Mr. Dahman asked me what I had a theory on, that there's from above, so many people from above are telling you guys what you need to do. My theory would be that there's a few key team players in key positions that are forcing people to take actions that they're really not in favor of. And so for those that are just doing that, I would say step down to take yourself out of this mess, because it's going to get if it turns out that this is just a big
30 seconds
propaganda event with these fake positive tests, parents are going to be it's not going to be easy. All right, thanks, bye.
Thank you. And last on the list is Tracy Hanna.
Hello. My name is Tracy Hanna, and I have a son going into 7th grade. Today, I would like to take a moment to thank Susan Probst for taking the time to meet with me and other parents last week to describe in depth the lengths this district takes to meet the needs of special education students. I do not think she is here. I think she said she was on vacation. She met with us after hours, and she stayed until all of our questions were answered. In my opinion, she went above and beyond to ensure we all had a good understanding of the program for our children, and I think she should be thanked and recognized for that. When this district went to virtual learning in 2020 and early 2021, all of our students were impacted, including our special education students. As a parent, I was given multiple IEPs, which the teachers took the time to develop, but there was stress and confusion as to the status of my child's learning and whether he had fallen behind. I can still not determine how much education was lost due to the loss of classroom learning, but I do feel that he's not where he could have been had we had a full year, the entire year in the classroom. That is time we cannot get back. As for the current requirements for lengthy quarantine without a virtual option, I feel we are setting ourselves up for failure moving into the coming school year. The Wired program as written does not seem to be a good option for my child, as this is a permanent virtual option and does not allow for the daily interaction that drives his learning. I would like to understand why this school district cannot develop a plan that would allow children who are quarantined to live stream into the classroom via their iPads so that they can continue to learn from their teachers and not be forced to learn alone. With all the technology available, wouldn't it seem prudent to review the capabilities for these students? I request this administration and the board further examine this topic for the benefit of all students in the district, and I feel our students may fall even further behind. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to item number 2, an update from Mr. Huffman. With a U. With a U, not an O. Yeah. It's good to see you.
Thank you. Good to be here. We are nearing the end of the projects now. That's relative to the long path that we've been on. So you'll see me for several more months. But your days of voucher reports with $4 million expenditures are going to start waning. And I'll be telling you more and more about spaces that are being completed. So I'm going to start there. Over at the middle school, it really is just about wrapping up the loose ends now. As I was here last week, they were paving. They actually just got the base course down. There's one more final course of asphalt to go down there. There are some windows that we've had some trouble. J.P. Cullen's had some trouble procuring at the very front of the building. Hope that those are going in over the next 2 weeks. But spaces are being completed and turned over for the operations team to get them final cleaned and ready to go. Certainly the classroom spaces, the cafeteria is really just short exterior windows and then interior windows that divide the cafeteria from the corridor. But I think the product is very good there. It's good to see the landscaper back on site now, working on the final landscaping activities there. So not quite done, but very close at the middle school. As we jump over to the high school, things are progressing. As we've talked about in the past, a real schedule issue is with the new gym. I'm happy to report that the Robbins flooring system has arrived. It has to sit in the space and acclimate for some time before installation can occur, but that's really the biggest piece that's out in front of us in the new gym. New weight room will be turned over for your use on August 16th. I stopped over there just before your meeting here, and they're prepping for installation of the flooring there, which is really the last activity before the new weight room equipment arrives in the week of August 2nd. So good progress there. The event entry really passed all of the structural components there. You can't see past the entry itself because it's all plasticed off, but down in the lobby of the event entry, they're putting on the final wall surface and drywall. They're working on painting of that space, and you'll really just see more finishes come along there. On the interior renovation side, classrooms that connect to the new STEM wing have been sitting sort of in an odd condition all through the spring, where you could see openings in the new addition that looked at old windows, kind of sandwiched between the old and the new wall. Those have been taken out now, and the connections between those older spaces, for instance, a math room into the STEM wing, those connections have now been made, and you can now travel on your first floor corridor and lower level corridor from your existing building into the STEM wing. So the exciting steps there. Also, there's now a focus on the exterior of the building. Over on the west side of the building around the STEM wing, they're doing some final grading and preparing for asphalt drive around the back side of the building. And then that will be followed up with the landscape working up to the new parking lot areas. There has been a little bit of failed work that needs to be remediated, and that really is centered on flooring. we kind of hemmed and hawed about the quality of the red staining of the concrete floors in the stem wing. And in the end, Excalibur, the company that did that staining, is coming back actually beginning this week to redo that red staining on the concrete floors. And then likewise in the pool, we were disappointed with the splotchy appearance to the cementitious finish in the pool and the pool locker rooms. And that is being revised, remediated this week as well. I think that's it by way of updates. I'll take any questions.
Mike, along High Street in front of the high school, segments of the sidewalk have been replaced or finished with asphalt rather than concrete. Is that the permanent solution? I don't know where else in the city there's asphalt sidewalks. So I was just curious what the status of that is.
Yeah, I'm curious about it myself. I can't give you a response. I drove by it tonight and thought, well, it's a real short section of asphalt preceded by concrete, and what we did last summer with the high school parking lot added new sections of concrete. So I don't have an answer for you right now, but I'll get you one.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions for Mike? Hearing none, I will say thank you very much for being here tonight and for your visual updates and for your updates that you gave us just now.
Okay, thank you.
Moving on to number 3, superintendent update. Letter A, summer school and MREC activities.
Just a couple things that I want to update the board on regarding different activities that are happening in our schools. July is typically the quietest month in our schools. If you recall, in June we had a large number of on-site indoors summer school classes across all of our different grade levels. Through July, we don't have as many of those going on, and then in August we pick back up with some. But what we do have going on in July are a lot of outdoor activities for students, a lot of sports camps, band camp, youth baseball, youth softball, and in our new swimming pool, a lot of swimming lessons, both for youth and for community members. So some of those are coordinated through our MREC program, some are coordinated just through our athletic department, and some of those are summer school offerings for students. But if you drive past, especially the high school and our outdoor fields in that area, during most days, you'll see all kinds of activity taking place. So as we get into August, we will have some more students coming back into our buildings with some of our Jumpstart classes. And before too long at Milton High School, our fall athletics and activities starting up. So just wanted to alert the board to that. And even though July is the quietest month in our schools, there's still a lot of activity happening there. And then the other agenda item under the superintendent's update is the strategic planning, data study, and goal setting. We're waiting for all of the board members to respond with dates that they're available. So if you haven't had a chance to do that yet, if you can do that either tonight or tomorrow, I want to get some dates finished up for that. We'd like to get something scheduled in August, perhaps. I mean, what we're looking at is possibly a half day in August and a half day in September, where we can look at our strategic plan, make sure the board members are aware of what's in our strategic plan, look at some of our data, and then also develop goals for the upcoming school year. We did get word just this week that some of our data from this previous year isn't going to be available publicly, including to be shared with board members until later on in the fall. And I'm not certain when or if they've set a specific date on that yet, but things like our Milton Forward data won't be available until sometime in the fall. But we do have a large number of other data that we can take a look at.
Thank you, Rich. Any questions on either of those items for Rich?
Just one quick one. Regarding MREC and Schulberg, do you know, Rich, next year will the concession stands be open at Schulberg? I know we were up there for a number of events, and certainly the crowds are large enough to justify some sales of Gatorade and chips and all that kind of stuff, but I don't know if it was the COVID shutdown, a staffing shutdown, or just how it is. But I know just chatting with some people, there would be an interest in having those concession facilities open in the
Like
summer
on
of 22.
evenings when there's a lot of activities going on and scheduled in the park, is that the type of thing?
Yeah,
or-
yeah.
Okay. I'll do some checking on that.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions for Rich? All right, let's move on to item number 4, curriculum committee report. Lots of items to discuss. So Shelley, I will turn it over to you.
All right, our curriculum committee met on July 13th, and we had several presenters. Our first one was Tara Sawinski from the middle school. She discussed the trimester plan for the middle school for this fall. They'd like to be able to align with the 9-12 schedule, which will be from 7:30 to 2:50. It would also align with the high school conferences and grading windows, so it'd kind of be a seamless transition from one to the other. They talked about looking at their iReady data and adding an iTime feature into the middle school every day, which would be 4 days a week, Tuesday through Friday, 2 times a week for MyPath, and 2 times a week instructional practice. She also discussed the transitioning to the trimester would help with shared staff for music and foreign language and advanced classes, so students are taking advanced math and other classes. Would also align with the professional development for their staff. Basically, it's calendar-based for exploratory classes. They're going to switch those to 12-week classes for art, world language, and tech ed. They're looking at being able to give students more choice on their scheduling opportunities when it comes to art and having different themes within the art and within music and things like that, so students could take it more than once during the year. They also just discussed the possibility of what districts in our area use trimesters for K-12, and they talked about Elkhorn, Watertown, and Monroe. Next was the Wired digital program that's going to be offered to K-12 students. Tara Hubner talked about that. It's kind of offering our own version of virtual learning post-pandemic. It will look quite different from what our virtual learning was. We surveyed students who would be interested in doing a complete virtual or some type of hybrid, and there was about 20 7th, 8th grade students interested and a larger number in the high school. This would take the place of our JEDI, Arise, and other programs that kids were using. Students will be creating their own program and then mesh some of the high school courses with online platforms. It's actually being revamped from what they had for Milton Wired. The MECA's teacher, Matt Smith, is going to be going to the high school to guide this whole program and process and run the Wired program. 7, 8 can choose for an all at-home based on past experience with virtual. So they will be screening the kids if they had success during virtual at-home learning. That will help with transitioning into this program. If there was some worries about them being successful during that time, there'll be a screening process with the parents and the students. They'll also be reviewing the high school students' academic work in that same area. There'll be core content areas and business teachers developing some of their curriculum. So they won't be tied in live with the actual classes, but the teachers will be developing a curriculum and kind of breakpoints of where they should be each week with their classes that they're in. It will be housed in Schoology and Edmentum. Let's see, then Ryan Ruggles talked about the ESSER 2 funds that we'll be getting from the COVID funds and instructional planning. There's lots of things that they're going to be doing with those funds. They're going to be helping to assist with our school scorecard process, align district strategic plan. We talked about universal curriculum and universal instruction. Looking at our standards and assessments, making sure we're in line with our essential standards, and we have interventions in place. They also talked about the MTSS process and supports, equity. So we're looking K-12 equity and opportunities for all students. Also having possibility of doing regular evaluations on where we're at in the process throughout the year, and the stress on K-12 alignment within all the different curriculum areas. We talked a little bit about response to schools training K-6, where we're looking at students' behavior in relationship to the success in school and success with academics. So we'll have teachers training in that. The AVID pathway training we talked about a couple of years ago, and it will be moved. It was middle school to start with, and now it will be 7-12. Our first kids, our core kids that started that program, will now be entering high school. So there's 20 to 25 kids they've been tracking and working with AVID coaches, and it will now be a 7-12 program. So we'll be training our teachers in that and looking at academic language and literacy. We'll also be using the funds for our second step curriculum, which we've talked about in the past for K-8. Restorative practices for discipline, 9-12. Technology for professional development for staff, literacy footprints. We have leveled text within the elementary classrooms, and those texts need updating. They've been in the classroom for several years, so we're looking at updating those. Equity training for K-12 staff, looking at data, opportunities for all, and achievement for all. And then finally, PLCs for staff planning. They're having a guest speaker come in at the beginning of the year, Rick Wormley. And then looking at social studies, resources, support, and alignment with state standards. Anything else, Ryan? Does anybody have any questions? We did a lot that day. We got a lot of good information.
The teachers that run Wired,
You did a great job, Shelley. Thanks.
just a quick question. The teachers running Wired, then, do they also have, if I understand it correctly, they do not have that same course load of students in person, right? There's a person dedicated to the Wired or people dedicated specifically to Wire. So if I were teaching science, I wouldn't have a group of science students in my class and Wired students asynchronously, simultaneously, correct?
Kara, do you want to talk about, I just was asking some questions as we were coming in.
Okay.
For clarification.
No, so the Wired teacher is going to be running all of the classes. So if anybody's creating that curriculum and content over the summer, the science teachers, math teachers, they're all handing it over to Matt, who's done alternative ed for I don't know how many years, but is used to delivering that content then himself. So once they're done with that, they aren't running the two simultaneously. Once they're done with their curriculum and hand it off to him, he takes over and is the teacher, the lead teacher. Of course, if there's questions, they're in the building. We have that study flex period now this next year. And so I'm hopeful that if those students are in the building or need to come back to the building, if they're learning all at home, they can use that study flex period to go in and meet with a math teacher or science teacher if they're struggling with something. So that's kind of where we're making that connection, but Matt's going to do an awesome job.
So this is not going to be in use for students who are absent due to illness, quarantine, what
No,
have you?
it isn't a synchronous program. So it's, yeah, you sign up for it at the start of the trimester and that's your program for that trimester. It isn't like a in and out week by week.
Sure. What plan then are we putting in place for those students who are, I mean, obviously, you know, if a student's absent due to a minor illness that's not COVID related, they'll probably only be out a couple of days, but those that are being quarantined, what's being done to help them make sure that they're staying caught up with their classes if they're not going to have that connection that they had this past year?
So there won't be the synchronous video learning like we had last year. All of our teachers update their Schoology pages and have since before COVID.
Sure.
So keeping up with the homework, emailing like you would if you were out for an extended period for something else.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions for Shelley?
Ryan, did you want me to talk about this at all?
Okay, hearing none, we will move on to item number 5, the Finance Committee report. Joe, I will turn it over to you.
Okay, Finance Committee met, I believe it was last week, and had a rather lengthy meeting covering a lot of topics. I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview and kind of share what our topics of discussion were, and then Carrie Bradley is going to share with us a couple. She has a presentation, and then obviously some more data. So we're at an interesting time of the year in the finance world. We've completed one budget cycle at the end of June, and when the calendar flips over to July, we start the new one. So Carrie lives in two worlds at the moment, two budgets. There is a unique opportunity relative to the budget we just finished, and we have some discretion or some options that's going to be part of the B on my agenda here. And we're going to have an explanation and then potentially take action on last year's budget and how that turned out for us. And that's on tonight's agenda for possible action, because the window to do so closes rather quickly. I think you have 30 days after June 30th or something like that. So at any rate, Carrie's going to do first. We'll let her do letter A, is a fund balance presentation. And I wanted to offer my thanks and compliments to her. She did it for the committee. And it's a presentation that's through WASB, or the business officials that have put it together. I've seen it a couple different times, and I've seen something similar several times, and you learn just a little bit more every time you walk through it. To say school finance is complex is probably an understatement, and I gain a little bit more and more every time we do it. So I think the committee got a great deal out of it. I hope the rest of the board does, and I'll let Carrie walk you through.
All right. So as Joe had indicated, this is a slice of a presentation that's done at the joint convention of the Wisconsin School Boards Association. And rather than my creating a presentation or taking theirs and putting it on Milton slides, I took the presentation and edited it so that the original authors can get credit. But then also I put in Milton information that we're going to want to review. And so there's a couple goals here that we have. One is to do a very high level conversation about fund accounting and governmental accounting. And then we're going to zero in on fund balance and kind of talk about what fund balance is and is not. So, and again, I think Joe said this presentation, I think, is a couple hours long, but we're just going to do a slice for 15 minutes or less. Okay. All right, and they talk about diving into school finance. So the first thing we want to talk about is fund accounting, and that is what governments do in school districts. And we have a fund. Each fund has a separate set of accounting records, and they're segregated for the purpose of carrying out a specific activity. And the reason they exist is to have accountability purposes and also to demonstrate that financial resources are being used only for purposes that are permitted. And that slide with the graphic that has the box on it that Kim is going to, I like that visual, so I left it in because the descriptor they're using is they're thinking of a fund as a self-contained box. And we put everything pertaining to a fund into that box. So inside that box, in accounting world to describe it, you're going to have a balance sheet that has assets, liabilities, and fund balance. And then we're going to have a series of revenue and expenditure accounts. We often talk about revenue and expenditure accounts, and we less often talk about fund balance. So when we're approving the budget, we focus on anticipated revenues and expenditures. This is, we don't spend a lot of time on the balance sheet. So today is our opportunity to do that. So in Wisconsin, we have the Wisconsin Uniform Financial Accounting Requirements, also known as WUFR. And there is a list of the major funds. We also use sub-funds in that as well, but those are the list of major funds. And just in reviewing it quickly, you can see that they have different purposes, whether it be general operations or debt service, capital projects. We've had a lot of the last year. Food service, we also have a trust fund and a community services fund. When you look at the financial statements, the budget for board approval, if you recall, Fund 90 is a package cooperative program. And for next year, MECIS is not going to be a co-op. The program still exists. We can allow others to attend, but we're going to account for it in the general fund. So that's an example where you're seeing a fund described on the slide, but when you look at the budget summary, you'll also notice that column has a 0 for next year as well, if you want to kind of connect the presentation pieces with what you're looking at pieces. If you go to the next slide then, Kim. These are examples of assets and liabilities. If you recall, we said there were, the box contained assets and liabilities. Assets include cash and investments, prepaids, receivables, and those receivables are often, and our largest ones are the tax levy and delayed equalization aid payment that we get. And then sometimes other school districts will owe us money as well after we close out the books and charge them for a service we provide. On the liability side, we have payroll payables, we have payroll liabilities, so that when we run a payroll, we do the withholding, and that will sit on the balance sheet until we remit the money that we have collected. We also have our cash flow borrowing on there as a liability because we have to pay that money back every year that we borrow it. And there can also be some general payables. In asset world, if it's not a cash or an investment or a prepaid, I think of it as money that's owed to us that we're waiting to get. And on the liability side, those payables is money we owe others. So it's just another way to look at it. And then the slide that Kim has there now talks about fund balance. And fund balance is really just this calculation at a point in time. And so and it does change on a daily basis. And as we see when we do our cash flow projections, although that's not fund balance, one piece of it is cash, and we see how our cash is not received on a consistent pattern. So, but I'm doing something that's confusing, so I'm going to call myself out here, right? And people on the committee know this, okay? I'm talking about fund balance, and I'm talking about in and out, and that's cash, and fund balance is bigger than cash. So when I do that, say, hey, Carrie, all right, we're talking about cash flow borrowing. Fund balance is important for that, but right now we should be talking about what the fund balance is and isn't. And so really, when the revenues come in, it says a fund balance increases, and I would modify that to say, or are recognized, because we do modified accrual accounting, and we book them in the fiscal year they will be occurring. For example, our tax dollars, because of modified accrual accounting, we're going to get a payment in August, but I have it booked now. So that's going to be on the books as a receivable. So we'll just leave it from there. Other than June 30th is a day that we all look at to see how our year ended. I've included this graphics as well. It's just a different way to look at fund balance. Typically, I talk in terms of assets and the difference between assets and liabilities is fund balance. This is just another way of looking at it, that your balance sheet has assets that are equal to the liabilities and your fund equity. Fund equity is also a term that's used to describe fund balance. So we need to be mindful of that as well. The fund balance classifications, there are basically 5 types of fund balance classifications. So this would be our equity accounts that we have, and they're classified. The level of classification has to do with the level of authority to make a decision with regard to that fund balance. Okay, and number 1 is non-spendable fund balance, which is prepaid expenses and inventory. So we've already paid for it. That commitment has been made, and we're waiting to book it in the proper year when it happens because we paid ahead. A restricted fund balance usually has some kind of a legal attachment that makes it restricted. An example we'll see when we look at our details is the common school fund allocation that we get. We are required to make sure that that money is spent for its required purpose, which is school libraries. Committed takes board action. Assigned fund balance, it says board assigned capital projects budgeted, and also I think that actually I have the authority to sign it, even though the presentation isn't saying so. And then finally, we have this unassigned fund balance, and that's where most of our fund balance lives. The following slide is an example of our balance sheet. And it's just here for demonstration purposes. You can see the first blue line is assets, which is a little over 14 million. Our liabilities is the next blue line, which is 6.3 million. And then our ending fund equity is 7.9. And you can see on the very first line of the fund equity where the arrow is, at the end of last year, we had about $30,000 in unspent common school fund money. So we say part of our fund balance needs to be spent this year on common school fund eligible purchases. And then every year we'll continue to track, and hopefully we will not have this moving into the future. But this year they ordered the books in April and they're sitting on a dock and they couldn't get them here by June 30th. So we're going to have that again in the next year. And then finally, the unassigned fund balance. I included the list because these are examples of what you could use fund balance for, or another way of kind of why do you have fund balance, right? And some districts perceive the rainy day funds or revenue stabilization. We've talked a lot about cash flow and working capital. We've certainly talked about contingencies with the uncertainty. We talked about last year as well that we didn't know what was going to happen. And this is related to loss. And I think, Joe, you've shared where we've had things that have happened related to loss and had to make repairs. There's also emergencies. And then there's an other which is not defined for any use. Each of these have a number attached to them, but I took the numbers off because there's enough numbers in here. And I want to have that. All right. So how does a June 30th fund balance shrink or grow? And again, this is another way of looking at fund balance. We take our ending balance, we look at the difference between the revenues and expenses, and then that will be our ending fund balance or our fund equity. When I talk about it, I usually say ending fund balance plus revenues less expenditures equals our ending fund equity, which I think you've seen as well. The other conversation that typically takes place is how large should our fund balance be? And the Department of Public Instruction basically says it's a local decision. When our auditors come, they talk about what they believe is an appropriate fund balance, which some committee members can speak to later if they choose to. But at a high level, fund balance helps you avoid interest cost and time lost associated with cash flow borrowing. It allows you to make special purchases or cover unforeseen expenditure needs. And then lower debt issuance costs and preserve or enhance your bond rating by demonstrating financial stability. And I think we have also seen that in the Milton School District as well. One of the things is that I like to talk about is we're able to respond to uncertainty in the future as well. And as you know, we are building a budget way before we know what our revenues are going to be. And then in the fall, our fiscal year begins in July, but we don't find out until October what our revenues are going to be. And we also firm up what our expenditures are going to be. Fund balance can be a buffer for us if we find out in the fall that our revenues are not what we had anticipated, or that our needs are much greater than we had anticipated. Another way to look at fund balance on slide 16 is as a percentage of your expenditures, and that's of your general fund expenditures on the graph. So the orange line is showing the percentage of fund balance as a percentage of expenditures, and the highest point there was 22.35, and then it has gone down. And then last year, which is the last bar, I believe, is the increase that was made last year when we didn't do any changes because we wanted to have those funds available to meet what needs might come up. Another thing that we always want to do is look at our board policy. And our board policy says that we should have enough fund balance sufficient to minimize or avoid excessive short-term borrowing for cash flow purposes. And so what that policy does is it gives us a good balance and something to work with, that we don't want it to be excessive. And I do not believe that you could describe what we do as excessive at all. And our goal is to minimize the amount of cash flow borrowing we need to do. Slide 18, then we're going to move into talking about cash flow. And the big takeaway from there, as you know, and I kind of do this when we talk about cash flow borrowing, is that our cash outflows do not align with our inflows. And the majority of our funds come from the tax levy equalization aid, to some degree special ed, and per pupil aids. And so that chart just shows you that the two don't align, as well as the graph then on the next page. The light blue bar is our expenditures, and in July, you can see we have expenditures and very low revenues, but yet in March, our revenues are much greater than our expenditures. So the following slide then will show you that typically we start running low on funds in October, that October-November window, and then a window in the spring again. So now we get to it's very important, even though I'm talking about cash flow borrowing, that we recognize that cash is an asset and it's part of the fund balance equation. But for us, one of the goals is minimizing cash flow borrowing. So we focused on the cash piece. So on the next slide, Kim, I pulled for us from our information report to DPI just as a demonstration. Okay, that the first two items are cash and investments that equal about 6.8 million, but yet our fund equity is 8 million. So that is just demonstrating that fund balance is more than cash. And then the final slide is a summary of the things that I think you hopefully all walked away from the presentation. Regarding fund balance being the relationship between assets and liabilities. It's something that is very fluid until we take our snapshot at year end. Cash is an asset, but fund balance does not equal cash. And the other thing on here that I like to want to just point out is there is a statement that it says there is no one size fits all. Different districts have different goals and different expectations and different norms. And so we continue, and as a committee, we talked about what works for us in this situation. So there isn't a one size fit all. And then Kim, if you could please put up the last slide for me. Just to make sure that I'm giving credit to the people that put the original presentation together.
Okay, any questions for Carrie on the wonderful world of fund balances? Thank you, Carrie. That was helpful. Like I said, I think all board members can gain from that. I know I certainly do every time I walk through it. So if there are no questions, we'll move on to B. This is titled Discussion and Possible Action on 2020-2021 Budget Performance and Fund Transfers. Here again, the committee had a lengthy discussion and a good one in regard to what we lived for a budget that would have just ended at the end of June here. Carrie has some numbers to share with us. I believe they're mostly realistic, somewhat preliminary. I guess there's some subtle adjustments that might happen. But just in layman's terms, we ended up with a positive cash flow relative to our budget. We have money left at the end of the year in a very plain term. Our job tonight is to pick a path as to what we do with that. So our discussion, I'll let Carrie give you the actual numbers, but our discussion basically targeted three potential places we can move that money, and it takes board action to do that, i.e. an actionable item here. The three things we can do with our money that's in surplus of our expenditures at the end of the year are to leave it in our general fund, which we often talk about as Fund 10. I guess if you hear us say that, that's the general checking, the normal everyday expenses that we incur, et cetera, income and expenses. And then we have two other options that I'll briefly outline. One of those is Fund 73. The acronym on it is OPEB. OPEB is Other post-employment benefits, which are the retirement benefits we offer to our staff that have worked for us over the years. And then the second option we might have is what we call Fund 46, Capital Projects Fund. We opened that trust fund a little over a year ago and put a modest amount of money in that. Strategically, that is an effort on our part to put money away to address capital projects down the road. The fund is set up in such a way that the money that you put into you have to start a clock running, a theoretical clock, from the day you open the account till the first time you can use it. That clock is 5 years. So we are a little over a year into that window, if you will. So monies that we would contribute a modest amount last year and potentially some this year and down in the future, those are funds available to us to address capital needs that we have in year 2025, if my math is correct, or close to that. So our discretion is how to divide up the pie, if you will. And Carrie can tell you what those numbers are. Having been through the COVID budget, is probably a poor way to say it, but we realized a little bit of less income in some areas, and consequently, we also realized lower expenses in several areas. So I think I'll pause there, let Carrie share with you what her estimates are for those numbers, and when she's done that, we can have a discussion, and the committee has a recommendation about what we want to do moving forward. Is that a good place to turn you loose?
Sure. So I just want to clarify, we have 3 options out there, and 2 of them require board action, because if you don't choose to identify funds for that specific purpose, right, for the building fund or the employment trust fund, then they remain where they are. So, and the reason I mention it is because those 2 are for specific purposes, and the general fund is general purposes, right? So, as you recall, we talked last meeting about throughout the year how we work on the budget. We build the budget, we monitor the budget, and we try and be responsive to needs. And this has been a most unusual budget year, to say the least. And last year was a little odd as well, but not as different as this year. And so I think I want to mention, it's not my memo, but I would like to mention that we just need to be aware that much of the budget was underspent because, if you will, of things that didn't happen, for lack of a better way of saying it, or positions we were not able to fill, or activities that didn't take place. I think it's also want to mention that we in the entire district and all the staff in the district responded to student needs in the most cost-effective and efficient ways that we could as we responded to COVID. And that's part of the reason why we are looking at the fund balance potential, or having the funds available to even consider transferring. So the first item is, as I had mentioned, it's related to vacancies and unpaid leaves of absence and fewer activities. We didn't have as many summer school offerings as evidenced in our FTE and the revenue limit. And we didn't use additional hours that we had budgeted for things like curriculum development or training or things outside the school day. So as a result, right now I'm estimating we're underspending that budget by almost $500,000. In addition to that, we also are going to underspend our benefits budget, the majority of which is related to us processing fewer claims. If you recall, we have an HRA. At the beginning of the year, our consultant gives us an estimate of what they're anticipating our claims to be are, and our claims were less than anticipated. Typically, we budget for all positions being filled and for normal activities. So we have, if I add them together, about $680,000 attributed to staff costs that didn't happen this year. Another area where the budget was underspent is in purchase services, and in Woofer World, that's the 300 object series. And a big piece of that is public school open enrollment participation. Our expenditures were less than we anticipated for open enrollment this year. We have a number of students in the fall that are identified, and then as we live the year, you see adjustments coming in and out at most board meetings when you're doing the alternative applications. So there are multiple times or places in the year where that number changes. And I think we also have a history of having some fairly large swings in that total number as well. And this year we are open enrollment winners. So this is a positive thing. Another area where we spent less was on transportation, and that includes to and from school, as well as field trips and the co-curriculars that did not happen. And then finally, the last item on my memo talks about special education costs being less. And we do a fund transfer for the local portion of special ed cost, which is kind of like the net cost of special education. And just like our general fund budget, we also had a similar experience in the special education fund budget. So when you get through all the numbers, what the committee looked at was that we're looking at about a 1.3 million that is available. And the board could choose to leave it where it is, or choose to transfer it to the employee trust fund, the post-employment benefit trust, to pay for that future benefits. We also have an unfunded liability in that account. We make payments annually, but we are not fully funded, and typically our payments are not in line to have that fully funded. We're not required to, but that is always something to be looking at, is to fund that. And then also we had talked about the capital projects fund as well, and that we considered a goal or a target. Maybe we could target $500,000 a year. And then finally, Joe, as you had mentioned, we had also talked about the impact on our financial position when our fund balance grows. But the decision before you today is, do I want to, or does the board wish to pull some money to set aside for the two specific purposes of the building fund or the post-employment benefit trust? Is that enough?
Okay, that's great. If it's your pleasure, Mr. President, I'll offer a motion, and should it get a second, I'll come back and get the committee's strategy, if you will. So I will move, allocate and transfer an additional $350,000 to the Post-Employment Benefit Trust Fund 73 and $200,000 to the Capital Improvement Fund 46.
I'll second.
There's a motion on the floor made by Joe, seconded by Leslie, to allocate and transfer an additional $350,000 to the Post-Employment Benefit Trust Fund 73 and $200,000 to the Capital Improvement Fund 46. And we will move on to discussion.
Carrie, I have a question on the $640,000 that was saved on staffing. Could that have been used during our negotiation process? Because we were wheeling and dealing over small amounts of money for staffing. And here we have a $680,000 surplus.
So I heard you use the word savings, and so we can talk about this as savings, but
Well, underestimate of what we paid out.
Because
Okay.
this isn't savings, and we had some conversations in the committee about, COVID saving all this money. It's like, well, no, that's not really what happened, and so that's why I'm.
And underestimate of what we budgeted.
But as I said, that when we budget for everyone to be fully staffed, everyone in your position. So if you use one-time unspent dollars and build those into the system that then continues to pay people moving forward, this will loop back to our sustainability conversation that we had when we were talking about staffing. So if you wanted to do something like that, you would have to do, with running into sustainability issues, you could look at doing a one-time thing. But this really isn't money that's available to use for our regular operating costs, which is why we're talking about taking advantage of the opportunity to use it for a specified purpose. But another layer of this, since you bring up negotiations, is that Although those dollars, because we had unfilled vacancies, those are dollars that were generated by our staff. And so the committee is looking at investing those dollars in the staff, into the employees' post-employment benefit. So,
And Carrie, I would echo that, being on the committee and having, as Joe indicated, a lengthy and good discussion on it. You know, one of the things we recognized in the committee was the one-time nature of the situation. And I think, and certainly anyone on the committee can correct me if I'm wrong, but the goal to try to do something that was lasting and long-term in our view with it. And so, piggybacking on Carrie's point, our ability to pay it forward, if you will, into post-retirement expenses was a recognition of part of that. Capital expenses, obviously, budgeting for maintenance and other long-term needs of the capital improvements is a sound fiscal principle for us. And then ultimately, building our rainy day fund, the fund balance, as our overall budget grows over time, having the level of that rainy day fund balance / checkbook, if you will, is important to keep that in a consistent place, not only for our ability to handle unexpected expenses, but our bond rating and borrowing costs and things that go along with it. So I think the committee decided we were able to do all of those things as part of this. And again, we had a lengthy discussion on it and felt that this was a good way to address that concern and some of the other concerns and hopefully make the job of future boards a bit easier with some of the decisions we're proposing here today.
Just one point I would reiterate is that while the motion would include specific dollars to transfer to those funds, the motion is specific relative to the dollars we would transfer to those funds, and the amount that's actually left over, if you will, that stays in the general fund would be an actual number yet to be determined. I mean, Carrie's given us real accurate estimates here, but the example on your sheet there, we're gonna pin down tightly the two amounts that we transfer should it be successfully voted, I should say, and the amount left in the fund balance would be somewhat subject to whatever her final number turns out to be. So, one other key point, relative to the capital fund. We built the budget, Carrie, jointly, we built the budget with $300,000 earmarked, if you will, towards that capital fund 46, with an overarching goal of about $500,000 per year, should we be able to, such that we're recommending putting $200,000 more in that fund with this action or potential action. So it does meet our goal of building that Fund 46 for our needs down the road. And we came up with an amount for the OPEB transfer balanced against an amount that would hopefully keep our general fund in line with where it's been and where it needs to be should our budget continue to grow.
I just have one quick question. So what was the conversation around the $350,000 then? Where did that number what was the discussion versus the 200,000?
So I think, correct me if I'm wrong, we backed into that number a little bit.
Okay.
200 became the easy one to grab first because it equaled a $500,000 commitment to the capital fund. And the balance was, we wanted to be significant enough to be meaningful toward the OPEB fund and leave a significant or meaningful amount in the general fund to keep it on the percent of our expenditures that it has been. So the 350 and it leaves about 750 in the general fund. So those are approximates, but is that the right characterization to be back into that a little bit?
Well, kind of. We had talked about looking at the total, and this is a little more than half of the total of unspent funds.
Of unspent. So, okay. So and two ways, and they both kind of aligned.
I think one of the other things, Jennifer, that we had talked about, the kind of feedback that this was trying to have, sorry. I think the other thing, sorry about that, Jen, was we were talking about trying to have the fund balance as a percentage of revenue to be kind of in that 15 to 20% of that. So that works out to be 7 to 11 weeks of expenses, roughly speaking, in the fund balance. In trying to be somewhere between those guardrails a little bit, and by having the number we anticipate there kind of keeps us on that trajectory to maintain that, assuming incremental growth and expenses going forward. So yeah, what Joe said is, as far as, capital expenses, how can we fund retirement expenses, and how do we kind of stay between those guardrails on percentage of expenses or percent of the budget? Kind of competing goals that I think we're all able to address to a certain extent as proposed here.
If I could, there is another document that's attached that shows the general fund balance history that's in board docs. And this is, I think, part of what Dave is talking about is if you look at the last line in the box up above, it says fund balance as a percentage of expenditures. Okay. And if you recall last meeting, we talked about our budget being about 45 million. We talked about 80% of that budget are costs that increase on a regular basis. But at a high level, if our budget is about 45 million, and we want to stay at that same percentage of expenditures, then we need to build fund balance as well if we have the opportunity to keep that percentage about the same. As a kind of another way of saying, I think that's where you were kind of going, right? Okay, thanks.
Any more discussion? Hearing none, I'll repeat the motion, which has been seconded. The motion is to allocate and transfer an additional $350,000 to the Post-Employment Benefit Trust Fund 73 and $200,000 to the Capital Improvement Fund 46. All in favor respond with aye.
Aye.
And opposed, nay. Motion carries. Kim, would you let the record show that I abstained from voting as a retired employee of the district? Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Carrie. Item C, moving on, preliminary budget update.
That was a heavy lift, so I appreciate you recognizing that was a heavy lift, Mike. Thank you.
At that. So I'll repeat. Carrie then uses a lot of the factors we just talked about to build her budget moving forward, and she is going to give us an update on what she is using to frame that at this point.
I also wanted to let you know that we will be publishing in the newspaper. I believe my dates are August 6th and August 12th. We'll be in the Courier. So if people see the budget, I want you to be aware it's published and invite them to the annual meeting, which will be on August 23rd, once you make the motion to make that happen, which I'm anticipating. So in your board packet, there are several documents, and the first one is the publication format that will be going to the Courier. There's a column. So usually there are 3 years. There's the audited data from 1920. You're going to have your unaudited 2021. And as I told you, we haven't closed out the fiscal year yet. I'm getting very close, and with tonight's action, I hope to be able to close everything out. I believe I will have an opportunity to update that column before it goes to the newspaper. And then the column on the far right is our 21-22 budget. And if you recall at the last meeting, I asked you to approve a budget for the annual meeting. A slight modification that I made to the budget that was approved has to do with the legislative action around school funding. So originally I had estimated that the revenue limit would go up about $150 per pupil. And if you recall, revenue limit is the revenue from local property taxes and general aid. And what happened is that did not happen. But more money was put in the general aid pot that we participate in. So what will happen then is we will have a lower tax levy. And that is on the upcoming graph. If you want to just go to the graph, Kim, that'll kind of show what happened. So if I compare fiscal year 21 budget to fiscal year 22. The blue bar is our local money, which includes our property taxes. The orange bar is state funds. And so if you look year over year, we're anticipating higher state funds, a lower tax levy, excuse me. And then also that green line is the increase in federal funds. And as you're aware, when we talked about building the budget, we kind of said this is coming and we have a plan for next year. And either we will have the revenue limit increase or we will use federal funds. So that chart shows the federal funds and what's happening. And then the next graphic in your materials just shows the year over year property tax change. And it will show that the property taxes are going down. Yep. So Kim's showing you the top bar and then the bottom one. And I'm trying to think if there was anything else that I wanted to mention before I jump to the graphics. Let me just check my notes. I don't believe so. Did the committee wish to add anything else? And that's just an information item for you, so you see it's coming. And if you have questions, if you're not comfortable answering them, please reach out and let me know, and we'll work to get them answered.
Thanks, Joe. Appreciate it. And thank you, Carrie, for your attention to detail and just your all the effort you put into everything that you present to the board. Appreciate it very much.
Thanks for staying.
Moving on to item number 6, student and family handbooks for the upcoming school year. Letter A says Sarah Stuckey, but I do not see Sarah here. So Jen, are you gonna? Thank you.
I just wanted to be noted that Sarah did a lot of the heavy lifting on this. We did collaborate, but just quickly updates, just names, numbers, changed the policy links so they would go right to Neola, so they would be accurate if parents did choose to click on them. Also updated Child Find to align with current practices, some nutrition team information, and then lastly added some annual notices to match what they're doing in the 712. And if anyone has any specific questions, I can do my very best to answer. One other thing we did do is put a link to the district website in regards to transportation. So if families had any questions regarding attendance zones or buy a seat, then it just goes right to our website.
Any questions for Jen? Thank you, Mrs. Green. Moving on to the middle school, Tara, for the handbook.
Our handbook is very similar to what Mrs. Kramer said. Updates to staffing, updates to our bell schedule, updates to some annual notices, continuing to be as aligned in our handbooks as we can, both elementary and then the high school level. So between Sarah, Jeremy, Tara, other people at the high school, we had tabs open of all 3 handbooks, seeing what things could make sure that the language was the same if you have a student in all 3 settings, that you would see similar language. So nothing major in the 7-8 handbook to pay attention to.
Thank you. And Tara, you're doing the high school?
Yeah, we have really no changes either. Update in staffing, same things as Tara just said. We did our heavy lifting with updating all the policies last year. So just a general check to make sure all the links worked. And that was basically the changes that were made this summer. So I'm happy that we did that last summer.
Any questions for Tara? Thank you to all of you for the work done on those handbooks. Moving on to number 7, new business. First item is discussion and possible action on a 2021-22 Milton High School extended field trip requests. I bet that's you again, Tara.
Okay, so we just have 2 for this meeting, getting back rolling with our extended field trips. The first one is a rather new one. It's the MHS. It's an honors choir group that's taking a trip to UW-Eau Claire. One overnight, about 32 students guesstimate at this point. And the second one is the annual history club trip that they take in October October 26th through the 31st. A couple of those nights are usually traveling nights that they ride in a bus together, and a few nights in hotels. Going to Philadelphia this year, but staying outside of the city. I know that's one general change that they made.
I just have a question. Parents will be made aware of the PPE requirements on the buses since it's transportation and have to agree to that.
Yeah, and whatever that looks like
Might
at that
be
point in time.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Tara about the trips?
I'll move to approve the 2021-22 Milton High School extended field trip requests as presented.
I'll second.
There is a motion on the floor made by Joe, seconded by Leslie, to approve the 2021-22 Milton High School extended field trip requests as presented. Any discussion? All in favor, respond with aye.
Aye.
And opposed, nay. Motion carries.
Thanks. Those kids will be very happy.
Yes, thank you. Item B is action on gifts and donations.
Oh, Mike, you missed
So sorry. I skipped down to number 8, where 7B, discussion and possible action on annual meeting date.
I will move set annual meeting date for August 23rd, 2021.
Second.
There is a motion on the floor made by Leslie, seconded by Joe to move it to set the annual meeting date for August 23rd, 2021. Any discussion on that? That is a little earlier than it has been in the past traditionally.
I just wanted to highlight that what you had shared, Mike, it's about a month earlier than it has been in the past. We will have that rather than having that here because we want to make sure we have room for any community members that want to attend. We've utilized the meeting room at Northside and plan to utilize that again for this meeting.
Thanks, Rich. Any other discussion? All in favor, respond with aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Item C, action on 2021-22 open enrollment alternative applications, which are in board docs. I'm sorry, I was muted for that. So moving on to item C, action on 2021-22 open enrollment alternative applications, which are in board docs.
I will move to approve the 2021-22 open enrollment alternative applications as presented.
There's a motion on the floor made by Leslie, seconded by Jen, to approve the 2021-22 open enrollment alternative applications as presented. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor respond with aye.
Aye.
And opposed, nay. Motion carries. Now moving down to number 8, action on staffing reports, which again was in board docs.
Second.
Motion on the floor made by Jen, seconded by Shelley, to approve the staffing report as presented. Any discussion on that? Hearing none, all in favor respond with aye.
Aye.
And opposed, nay. Motion carries. Thank you. Moving on to action on gifts and donations.
I will move to approve the gifts and donations with gratitude.
Second.
There's a motion on the floor made by Leslie, seconded by Dave, to approve the gifts and donations always with gratitude. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor respond with aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Mr. Dahman, upcoming meeting dates for board and committees.
There are a couple upcoming meetings. We are still working to schedule an HR committee meeting, so we will get that scheduled out and sent out to people. We may have to go with just 2 of the 3 HR committee members because of the timing that we need to get that meeting in and the lack of available dates for all 3 members. We have a policy committee meeting coming up on Tuesday, August 3rd. That will be here at 1 p.m. Our next regular meeting is on Monday, August 9th at 6:30 p.m. here in the PDC. And then the board just approved the date and time for the annual meeting, August 23rd, and that will be at Northside.
Thank you for that. Before we adjourn, I would just like to publicly say welcome back, Mrs. Kleba. It's nice to see you. We missed you, and it's always good to have our whole family back. So good to see you. Looks like we have exhausted the agenda, so I will entertain a motion to adjourn. There's a motion on the floor to adjourn made by Dave, seconded by Leslie. All in favor say aye. 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 And opposed, nay. Motion carries. Thanks everyone for being here.